Hello, welcome to today's video on John Keats. Today we're going to look at the first 10 stanzas of one of the most incredible poems that he's written, which is called Isabella or the Pot of Basil. And one of the most incredible things about this poem is the plot, but we'll get on to that in a minute. Just a little bit of context first. So the story was adapted from an Italian writer called Boccaccio. And the story itself is set in Florence, which is an absolutely beautiful city. If you get the opportunity to visit it, you absolutely should. It was written in March 1818, so this comes before the Eve of St. Agnes if you're also studying that for your A-levels. In terms of the form of the poem, it was written in an Italian form called ottava rima. Apologies for my pronunciation there. So as I said, it's Italian. Each stanza contains 8 lines of iambic pentameter. Now, in iambic pentameter, we have 10 syllables per line. That's divided into 5 stresses. So that prefix pent means 5. If you think about the pentagon in maths, for example, as a 5-sided shape. So your 10 syllables is divided into 5 stresses, and that goes in a particular rhythm, which is the iambic rhythm, and that's da-dum, 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 da-dum. If you think of a poem you might be familiar with from your GCSEs, a sonnet by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, that begins with the rhythm or with the line, I think of thee, my thoughts do twine and bud. And you can really clearly hear that da-dum, 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 that iambic rhythm in that line. I think of thee, my thoughts do twine and bud. Anyway, don't need to get hung up on it, but that's the rhythm of this poem. The rhyme scheme in ottava rima is A, B, A, B, C, C. So we have that couplet at the end of each stanza. Now, this particular choice of form fits the Italian setting really nicely. It's really appropriate that Keats has chosen to use this for an Italian-themed poem. But it's also interesting because the form was originally developed for religious poetry, and we're going to see an awful lot of religious imagery used to describe the lovers in this particular poem. So that, again, is a nice connection that Keats has made. Okay, in terms of the plot, this is what everyone is obsessed with in this poem. So we have a girl called Isabella. She's wealthy, she's upper class, and she falls in love with Lorenzo, who is of lower social status than her. Isabella's brothers discover the relationship. They are absolutely incensed because they want Isabella to marry a wealthy nobleman. They want her to make an equal or a better match, not marry some kind of lower class guy for love. I mean, how ridiculous. So the brothers are not happy with this relationship. As a consequence of that, they murder Lorenzo. They bury him in a forest. And then this is where the poem starts to get really interesting in terms of the plot. Lorenzo then appears to Isabella in a vision and tells her what has happened. Isabella goes and discovers Lorenzo's body. She takes his head, which she then plants in a pot of basil in her home. And as that plant flourishes, she nourishes it with her tears. Isabella fades away, and the brothers realize that something is up. They discover the head. They're so horrified by what they find that they flee Florence, and Isabella's left alone in absolute despair. The brothers have taken the pot of basil with her lover's head in it, and so she dies as a consequence. So the story is a pretty dramatic one, but it starts with quite a, I was going to say pedestrian, that's not quite the right word, but it starts with quite a kind of stereotypical falling in love situation where Lorenzo and Isabella like each other but don't quite know how to speak to each other. What if the other person rejects them? All of that kind of thing. So it starts in quite a standard way, and then the story takes on this really macabre, gothic kind of plot to it. In terms of the key ideas that we're going to see in these first few stanzas then, so we see the pain and the frustration of unfulfilled desire in the lovers. They don't know how to speak about their love to the other person. They're worried about rejection. We also see a lot of religious imagery, which I've already mentioned, and that emphasizes the purity and the innocence of their love. And that is a really sharp contrast with the brothers' cruel worldliness. And then we see the transience of love as well. So even when the lovers do manage to speak to one another, they do admit that they love each other in the kind of first section of the poem. Keats is seeding an idea that this love is going to be transient, it's not going to last. Okay, I would recommend that you have a copy of the poem in front of you for this next section of the video. So if you need to pause the video and get your copy out, that is fine. And I also recommend that you have a highlighter and a pen. And as I talk you through the poem, that you pause the video and annotate the poem as you go. Okay, we're going to start with stanza 1. What an opening line. Fair Isabel, per simple Isabel. Now, in the modern world, we might take this as being a little bit of an insult. However, I don't think it's supposed to be offensive in terms of Keats calling Isabel simple. It's supposed to suggest that she focuses on the fundamentals of life. She focuses on what's important, which is love, whereas her brothers focus on kind of complex worldly things to do with money and industry and social class and so on. Isabel is much happier in a pastoral, natural setting with the man that she loves. It emphasizes her purity and her innocence. Then we have Lorenzo, who is the man that she's fallen in love with. So Lorenzo here is described as a young palmer in love's eye. Now, palmer is another word for a pilgrim. I've been on a couple of pilgrimages, and a pilgrimage is essentially where you go on a religious journey. It's a time of prayer, of meditation, as you walk across the landscape to a particular religious destination. So the pilgrimages that I have done, one of them started in Scotland in a place called Melrose, and I walked across to Holy Island in Northumberland, which is a place of kind of particular religious significance in Christianity. So it's a time of meditation and prayer approaching that religious location. There's all sorts of pilgrimages in all different religions, and they generally kind of end up at a temple or a mosque or some place of kind of religious importance. Anyway, this is where we see the start of the religious imagery in this particular poem. And as I've mentioned already, it emphasizes the lover's purity, their innocence, their genuineness, the truth in their relationship with each other. And that is in complete contrast with the brothers. It's also interesting here that Keats is alluding to Shakespeare, to Romeo and Juliet. Now, if you've read that play, wonderful. If you haven't read it, go and read it. Most of you might have seen the Baz Luhrmann production with Leonardo DiCaprio in it. But in that particular play, there's a speech when Romeo first meets Juliet where he describes himself as being a palmer. And that, as we know, is a story of forbidden love, where the families don't want these two lovers to be together. And that links in really nicely with the plot of this particular poem, where the brothers don't want Isabella and Lorenzo to fall in love with each other. However, we also know that Romeo and Juliet ends in death, in disaster, in distress, in heartbreak, in tragedy, essentially. So already in this second line, Keats has seeded this idea that the love that these two share is going to be transient and it's going to end in inevitable doom. Okay, and on that positive note, let's continue. So line 3, they could not in the self-same mansion dwell without some stir of heart, some malady. They could not sit at meals but feel how well it soothed each other to be by. They could not share beneath the same roof sleep, but to each other dream and nightly weep. So they cannot live in the same house and deny the love that they feel for each other. This phrase nightly weep shows the frustration of their unfulfilled desire. They are in tears because they do not know how to speak to each other. In the second stanza then, with every morn their love grew tenderer, with every eve deeper and tenderer still. He might not in house, field, or garden stir, but her full shape would all his seeing fill, and his continual voice was pleasanter to her than noise of trees or hidden rill. Her lute string gave an echo of his name. She spoiled her half-done broidery the same. Okay, so their love is tender, it's soft, it's gentle. This is not kind of passionate lust at this point, but it's a kind of deep, a deep and tender and gentle love for one another. Now, the lute that's mentioned in this particular stanza is a musical instrument, and it's interesting that that's the one that Keats has chosen here. In Greek mythology, Orpheus played the lute, which he used to charm animals and plants. And as you can see on the screen there, I've put a little section, again from Shakespeare, because Keats loves Shakespeare and so do I, a section from Shakespeare's Henry VIII, where he writes about Orpheus and how Orpheus used his lute. Now, what's interesting here is the connection between the lute and the natural world. And we're going to look at the natural setting in a little bit as well. And that word broidery, just in case you don't recognize that, that refers to embroidery. So as an upper class woman, she's supposed to follow upper class female stereotypes. For example, playing the piano and staying in the domestic sphere and doing beautiful embroidery and all of that kind of thing. However, she's not following those conventions. She's not finishing her embroidery, which is an interesting little detail there. Okay, the third stanza then. So Lorenzo knew whose gentle hand was at the latch before the door had given her to his eyes. So before the door even opens, he knows if Isabella's on the other side. And from her chamber window he would catch her beauty farther than the falcon spy. So he can see her from a huge distance. Don't know if that's a little bit creepy and ominous. And constant as her vespers would he watch, because her face was turned to the same skies, and with sick longing all the night outwear to hear her morning step upon the stair. So they're awake all night, they're looking at each other, they're casting little glances at each other, but still they cannot speak about their love to one another. I've highlighted the word vespers, that's evening prayers. So again, we see a continuation of this religious imagery. Just a little note on this setting before we move on. We've got quite a natural setting here. You can see that highlighted in yellow. We've got the house, that is true, but also the field and the garden, the noise of trees. You can imagine the leaves whispering in the wind. A hidden rill. A rill is a stream. So we've got the kind of gentle noise of water kind of rippling in the background. And then we've got the skies as well. So this setting is really idyllic. It's uninterrupted by social constraints, by social expectations. You could compare it to the natural setting at the start of Lamia, if you're doing a Lamia by Keats, and up until the point where Lamia and Lycius kind of have their home and their wedding in their home, and they invite society in, we have this really perfect natural setting, and then that's shattered by the arrival of society. Well, the pattern is pretty similar in this particular poem. We have a natural setting which is going to be shattered when the brothers interrupt the love and the relationship, and they bring those social expectations in. Moving on to stanza 4 then, we have some seasonal imagery here. We have May and we have June, and spring and early summer is all about growth and development and new beginnings. So a whole long month of May in this sad plight made their cheeks paler by the break of June. So their love is burgeoning and growing as the kind of spring turns into summer. Tomorrow will I boon to my delight. Tomorrow will I ask my lady's boon. So this is Lorenzo kind of psyching himself up. He's going to tell Isabella that he's in love with her. Boon is a blessing, in case you don't know that. Oh, may I never see another night, Lorenzo, if thy lips breathe not love's tune. So this is Isabella psyching herself up to speak to Lorenzo. So spake they to their pillows, but alas, honeyless days and days did he let pass. So they're letting time pass, letting time fade away, and their whole existence during that period is honeyless. What a beautiful choice of word from Keats. Honey is sweet, and it's something that kind of is full of joy and hope, and it's also connected with nature. And because they don't speak to each other about their love, their life lacks that joy and sweetness. In stanza 5 then, until sweet Isabella's untouched cheek fell sick within the rose's just amain, fell thin as a young mother's who doth seek by every lull to cool her infant's pain. How ill she is, said he, I may not speak, and yet I will, and tell my love all plain. If looks speak love laws, I will drink her tears, and at last will startle off her cares. So Isabella becomes physically ill because of this love that she hasn't been able to share. Stanza 6. So said he one fair morning, and all day his heart beat awfully by against his side, and to his heart he inwardly did pray for power to speak, but still the ruddy tide stifled his voice, and pulsed resolve away. fevered his high conceit of such a bride, yet brought him to the meekness of a child. Alas, when passion is both meek and wild. Look at that juxtaposition there of meek, something that's really soft, that's quite shy, that's quite timid, and wild, something that's as uncontrollable as the natural world. And Keats loves these kind of juxtapositions. He loves the word wild as well. We see it in La Belle Dame sans Merci. And it's a word that often suggests something outside of social convention, outside of social expectation, something uncontrollable, but also really natural. Stanza 7 then. So once more he had waked and anguished, a dreary night of love and misery. Dreary, that is such a good Keats word. It kind of encapsulates all of the sadness and the frustration that Lorenzo is feeling, but also how slow every moment is passing without his lover. If Isabel's quick eye had not been wed to every symbol on his forehead high, she saw it waxing very pale and dead, and straight all flushed, so lisped tenderly, Lorenzo. Here she ceased her timid quest, but in her tone and look he read the rest. Okay, so they finally managed to admit that they love each other. Stanza 8. O Isabella, I can half perceive that I may speak my grief into thine ear. If thou didst ever anything believe, believe how I love thee. Believe how near my soul is to its doom. I would not grieve thy hand by unwelcome pressing. I would not fear thine eyes by gazing, but I cannot live another night and not my passion shrive. So the admission of love here comes again with this religious language. So the word shrive means to confess something. If we think about the Catholic world, we have the confession boxes and so on. So we have more religious language, more purity and innocence and perfection associated with this relationship. Stanza 9, we have more loving language here. Love, thou art leading me from wintry cold. Lady, thou leadest me to summer clime, and I must taste the blossoms that unfold in its ripe warmth this gracious morning time. So said, his erewhile timid lips grew bold, and poesied with hers in dewy rhyme. Great bliss was with them, and great happiness grew, like a lusty flower in June's caress. Okay, so in green, I've highlighted words that are to do with love, but also that are to do with moving from winter into summer, and that are to do with flowers developing and blossoming and becoming ripe. Now, Keats often uses this kind of imagery to represent love at its best, love at its fullest, when the heart's passion is fulfilled by acceptance by the other person. We see it in the Eve of St. Agnes when Porphyro goes into Madeline's room, and the beautiful feast is there. You've got the warmth of the light coming in through the windows. And we see it in La Belle Dame sans Merci when the elfin lady takes the knight to her grotto initially before everything gets cold and drear on the cold hillside. And we see it in Lamia as well. So this is imagery of summer, imagery of fruit, imagery of flowers blossoming. The word poesied means to write poetry, essentially. So all of this idea of love is caught up in the creative act as well. Stanza 10, parting they seem to tread upon the air, twin roses by the zephyr blown apart. Again, we've got that imagery of nature, of flowers. A zephyr is a west wind or a gentle wind, so this suggests that yes, they can be together, but inevitably they're going to be separated every so often. So a little seed of doubt here from Keats. Only to meet again more close and share the inward fragrance of each other's heart. Oh, that is beautiful. Such a Keats line. The fragrance of someone's heart. It shows their real intimacy and closeness. She to her chamber gone, a ditty fair sang of delicious love and honeyed dart. Right, before they admitted their love, their lives were honeyless. Now their lives are honeyed. They're full of sweetness and joy. And remember, that's a bit of natural imagery as well. The honeyed dart is also a reference to Cupid's arrow. He with light steps went up a western hill, and bade the sun farewell, enjoyed his fill. All close they met again before the dusk had taken from the stars its pleasant veil. All close they met all eves before the dusk had taken from the stars its pleasant veil. Close in a bower of hyacinth and musk, A bar, or I'll say it in my English accent, bower, is a kind of shady place full of plants, and in this occasion those plants, those flowers, are hyacinth and musk. Beautiful smells, beautiful setting, totally separate from nature and society and social expectations, all of those things which are going to come crashing down when the brothers get involved. Then in green, in stanza 11, unknown of any, free from whispering tale, better had it been for ever so, than idle ears should pleasure in their woe. So here Keats is saying this beautiful natural setting is free from whispering tale, from gossip, from people talking about the fact that they're of a different social class. And then it says, better had it been for ever so. Here Keats means it would have been better if this had lasted, but it's not going to last. Love, perfection, joy is transient, and the doom of this relationship is inevitable. And Keats picks up this idea of inevitable doom in the allusions that he makes in the next couple of stanzas. An allusion, remember, is a reference to another story, and here Keats alludes to a couple of stories from Greek mythology, which I'll explain in a minute. So, stanza 12. Were they unhappy then? It cannot be. Too many tears for lovers have been shed. Too many sighs give we to them in fee. Too much of pity after they are dead. Too many doleful or sad stories do we see, whose matter in bright gold were best be read, except in such a page where Theseus's spouse over the pathless waves towards him bows. Theseus's spouse is called Ariadne. She helped Theseus defeat the Minotaur, and then she was abandoned by him. And it's interesting to me here that she doesn't even have her own name, that's how much Theseus has eradicated her from his mind, and that even her name is gone. Stanza 13, we have another allusion, this time to Dido, who was the Queen of Carthage. As a child of the 90s, I also love Dido's music. But anyway, this is an allusion to the Queen of Carthage. Aeneas, that great warrior, fell in love with her, but he left her as well, like Theseus did with Ariadne. So we've got two stories here where the woman has been left by the man. So again, Keats sowing those seeds of that inevitable ending of Lorenzo and Isabella's love. So stanza 13, but for the general award of love, the little sweet doth kill much bitterness, though Dido silent is and undergrove, and Isabella's was a great distress. Though young Lorenzo in warm Indian clove was not embalmed, this truth is not the less. Even bees, the little almsmen offspring bars, know there is richest juice in poison flowers. An almsman is someone who collects alms. So essentially this would be a charity worker who collects alms, or who collects money that was going to be distributed among the poor. I teach in Durham, and in the centre of Durham we have a place called the Alms Houses, which were originally those kind of charity buildings where that money could be used to help the poor or the suffering. So again, a bit of a hint of sadness, of suffering, of problems coming here. And we're going to leave the poem on this final line of stanza 13, the richest juice in poison flowers. This image is a little bit like that of the poison chalice. So at the moment of greatest joy and greatest happiness and sensual experience, there is also this idea of poison. So again, the hint at the inevitable doom of this relationship. Okay, I want you to consolidate what we've been through then. So go back through the stanzas that we've read and compile notes under the following categories, and we'll pick up on stanza 14 on the next video.